Huge misdirection of management energy. When they start, it's not the money. When they start threatening to put you in jail, Sarbanes-Oxley and Patriot Act can put you in jail. That's what you focus on. That's what you focus on. Great misconception. The head of the Federal Reserve, the head of the FDIC telling me, we really would like banks to make loans. We give you all this capital. That's a lie. The regulators are swarming over the banking industry in the U.S., making it very hard to make loans. Why is that? You got long-term government bureaucrats running the regulatory side. They don't care what people in Washington think. Those are political appointees. They don't want their bank to look bad. Credit standards have been tightened by the regulators. Same thing happened in 1990. Worst in my career of what's happening today. This week, BB&T will not make loans we would like to make and should make. We'll put people out of business we would like to keep in business and shouldn't be put out of business because of the regulators. And that's happening all over the country. Happening all over the country. The SEC, I talked a good bit about that, but I want to hit one point on the SEC. Loan loss reserves. Traditionally, in the banking business, loan loss reserves were set kind of on a subjective basis. And what we've learned, and it's an interesting old saying, but very true, is you make your bad loans in good times. So what you do in good times, when you make a lot of money, you raise your reserve. It's a subjective call. The SEC stopped that from happening. They forced banks not to do that. They forced us into mathematical models, and these models look back at history, and then they added in economic projections. Well, you remember when this cycle started, we'd had, since 1990, we had not had a significant economic correction, particularly in real estate, so the actual loss ratios were very low. And then all economists, including the Fed economists, were projecting a good economy. So banks had very low reserves going into this correction. Much lower than we would have chosen to have if we'd been allowed to do it. And a lot of losses initially in the banking industry were simply banks bringing back their reserves to levels they would have had if they could have the SEC hadn't prevented them. You remember all these programs. Remember the HOPE program was a $300 billion program. Under that program, you were supposed to mark a house down to market, then take a 20% discount and the government would take the loan. That program was such a great idea, I think they've had about 5 houses financed under it. TARP program that went to Congress with us, remember that program was where they were going to buy all these instruments and they were going to own them. And they had a lot of problems with that program on how to price the instruments. But the other problem was if they took all these bonds, were they going to be foreclosed? The government going to foreclose on all these homeowners. So that had to happen. There's kind of a fatal flaw in these programs. They're all focused on marginal borrowers. Remember, banks have a huge motivation to help people that are in trouble. We do not want houses. We do not want houses. And also, just from an ethics perspective, how much do you want to help marginal borrowers? Remember, they didn't put anything down. They bought too big a house. A lot of them chose to pick a payment mortgage. You get mad at Countrywide and say, okay, those guys did a bad thing. Well, yes and no. We had plenty of borrowers that came to BB&T. We said, we don't make pick a payment mortgages. You shouldn't buy this big a house. You can't really afford it. You ought to get a traditional mortgage and buy a smaller house. They said, no, thank you. I want to buy a bigger house. I'm going to go to Countrywide and finance it. Do you really want to bail them out? I mean, is that the right thing to do? I'll give you a personal example. I have a son that was living in California at the time, chose not to buy a house. So this real estate thing's crazy. I have another relative who lives in California, chose to buy 2 houses. Now, I'm not bailing him out. I don't know whether you want to or not. Moral risk is non-trivial. Last fall, when this thing was hitting the market, I was visiting BB&T's Mortgage Collection Center in Greenville, South Carolina, and one of the collectors handed me the phone, handed me the headset, which kind of harassing me, I think, but anyway, it was funny. And I had a guy on the line. This was a guy that had moved from the Northeast, retired, moved from the Northeast to Florida. He bought $1 million house, put $400,000 down, so he owed we made him $600,000 mortgage. According to him, the house was now worth $500,000. And he wanted us to forgive $100,000 and cut his interest rate, which was already 5%, wasn't too high, to 3%. And the guy had $800,000 in the bank. I asked him an interesting question. I said, we know if this house had appreciated from $1 million to $2 million, would you send us a check for $1 million? I don't think so. Market corrections are not all bad. They're not much fun, but they're not all bad. The world's a better place to live. The Countrywide Washington Mutual out of business. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Credit standards were too loose. Too loose. We'd set ourselves up with excessive leverage. We had no savings. That's destructive. We had overinvested in housing. We needed to realign our investments. We needed a correction process. It's a natural process. What we did need are two things. First, we did need the magnitude of the errors that, because the Federal Reserve and housing policy had set us up for a much bigger bubble than housing in a natural market would have ever allowed. And then secondly, we didn't need the panic to follow. And panics are all bad things. If you think about it, and we saw this in our business, when Bernanke and Paulson went to Congress and asked for $700 billion, we just saw the business fall. The business was slow, just fell off the chart. It's scary. $700 billion used to be a big number, right? Not anymore, it used to be. Inconsistency, save City, let Wachovia fail, save Goldman, let Lehman fail, unpredictability, create a self-fulfilling spiral now that I think we're through, but that was a lot of the crisis. Part two is where the big capital injection into banks. One thought about Part two, a lot of people view that as a subsidy in the banking industry. It's a subsidy to unhealthy banks. Healthy banks, it was a terrible ripoff because we didn't need the money. In fact, it cost BB&T about $250 million for being TARP. We paid about 9% interest rate, and the government got warrants on our money. And then when they came back and did their own analysis, they said, well, you didn't really need this capital anyway. So it was a ripoff for healthy banks. TARP also something that people didn't talk a lot about. One of the big goals was to save General Electric. General Electric is a huge economic force, high-risk finance business. They do lots of high-risk financing. They finance their high-risk finance business in the commercial paper market. The commercial paper was locking up. So one of the goals was to keep General Electric in business. You can debate whether we had to do TARP 2 when we did it. Probably by the final time we got to it, after they'd gone to Congress and the president says the sky's falling, maybe they needed to do something. There was lots of ways we could have not gotten into the condition we were to do that. And what's really bad about it, while it may help in the short term, it could be very destructive in the long term. All large banks participated in TARP. We were forced to, essentially. And that's basically everybody over $100 billion. So the reason for that, there were 4 large banks that were failing. But they didn't want to just help those banks. In fact, Bernanke's a real student of the Depression. During the Depression, Roosevelt tried to pick out banks to help. And as soon as he helped one, they ended up in worse shape as the market figured that out. So Bernanke says, let's force all the large banks to participate so you can't figure out who's good and bad in that process. They presented it as we would give more money for banks to lend. That was not what it was about. It was to stabilize some large financial institutions, and they forced all $100 billion players into the process. The long-term effect is a huge moral hazard, and this is non-trivial. In my career, Citigroup's failed 3 times, and every time they've gotten bigger and worse. And at this time, they'll get bigger and worse. I mean, the zebras don't change their stripes. We created an oligopoly, which is non-trivial for you in business, where there are 5 financial institutions that are, quote, too big to fail. What that means in a good marketplace, they'll be able to raise capital more aggressively. They'll probably make bigger mistakes. It creates a lot of market risk. And they were not selected properly, right? They're actually the failure. Citigroup is going to be one of the survivors that were selected by a healthy partner because they failed. Interesting process. And I am not an advocate of antitrust in general. But if these institutions are really too big to fail, they ought to be broken up. I don't believe they're too big to fail. I think they could be allowed to fail. But if they are too big to fail, they ought to be broken up because this creates a real phenomena of misallocation of capital in a government-sanctioned oligopoly. By the way, Federal Reserve antitrust policies are really irrational. Several years ago, BB&T bought a small bank in western North Carolina. We had to invest a $25 million branch. They allowed Wachovia and Wells Fargo to go together, creating a $1.3 trillion institution with no investors. No logic in antitrust.